I was watching my daughter Sophie sleep peacefully in her crib when a call from my husband made my heart tighten. Emily, why are you leaving the baby at Sarah's every day? His voice was filled with anger. I was stunned because Sophie was right here. But when the truth was revealed, my whole family was rocked by a horrifying secret. The baby Sarah was taking care of wasn't Sophie, but the child of a traitor within our own family. I used to think our little wooden house nestled on the edge of Maplewood Lane was the very definition of peace. The kind of place people from the city dreamed about on long commutes and noisy sidewalks. Every autumn, the maple trees outside turned a brilliant shade of red, their leaves cascading down like quiet confetti. The scent of cinnamon from the bakery down the road often drifted through the kitchen window. Life here was good, or at least it looked that way. Inside our warm home, sunlight spilled across the wooden floors, dancing through the gaps in the cream-colored curtains. Sophie, our 2-month-old daughter, was asleep in her crib, her tiny chest rising and falling with soft, rhythmic breaths. Her cheeks were rosy, hands curled into perfect little fists near her face. I sat beside her, barely breathing, as if afraid that even the sound of my contentment might stir her. James, my husband, was everything I had prayed for during long, uncertain years. He was gentle, patient, someone who brought me a hot cup of tea when the baby wouldn't sleep and folded laundry without ever being asked. He worked in finance, mostly from downtown Chicago, and often came home late, tired, but always with a smile for me and a kiss for Sophie. Still, motherhood was lonely in ways I hadn't expected. My parents lived in California, a 4-hour flight away, and while we FaceTimed often, it didn't replace the warmth of a hug or the comfort of a hand on my back when I felt overwhelmed. James was supportive, but there were moments like this quiet afternoon when I would sit by Sophie's crib and feel an ache that had no name. That was when my phone rang. I picked it up without looking, assuming it was a friend or a neighbor. But it was James. His voice startled me sharp, tense, unlike the warm tone I was used to. "Emily," he snapped. "Why the hell did you drop Sophie off at Sarah's again?" I blinked, the blood draining from my face. "What? Don't play dumb," he continued, breathing hard. "I just talked to Sarah. She said she's watching Sophie while you rest." "Why would you even let that happen without telling me?" I stood abruptly, nearly knocking over the rocking chair. Sophie was still asleep, right in front of me. "She's here, James," I said, my voice trembling. "Sophie is home. I haven't seen Sarah in days." There was a long silence on the other end. For a moment, all I could hear was my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I walked over to the crib again, as if I needed to confirm what I already knew. Sophie, wrapped in her favorite lavender blanket, stirred slightly and let out a sigh. "What do you mean she's there?" he finally asked, quieter now, but still uncertain. "She's here," I said again, slowly, firmly. "I would never send her to anyone without telling you, especially not your sister." James didn't respond right away. I could almost feel his confusion through the line. "Then why would Sarah say that I don't know?" I whispered. "But I'll call her right now and find out." Another pause. "Okay, just let me know what she says." He hung up. I stood there for a moment, unable to move. My hand was still clutching the phone, now silent, as if it had just delivered a warning from another universe. I looked back at Sophie, still sleeping peacefully, unaware of the storm that had just cracked open. My mind raced. Was it a misunderstanding? A weird joke? A mistake? But then, slowly, like ink spreading through water, something darker crept in. Why would Sarah lie? Why would James be so convinced? And why did something about all of this feel wrong? I didn't have answers, only questions and a growing sense of dread curling deep in my stomach. I kissed Sophie's forehead, reached for my phone again, and scrolled to Sarah's contact. Whatever was happening, I needed to know the truth. And I needed it now. I didn't call Sarah right away. I stood by Sophie's crib for a long moment, watching the way her little fingers twitched in sleep, the rise and fall of her tiny chest. My mind was still trying to make sense of what James had said. The longer I stood there, the more the fear began to root itself deeper. Who was the baby Sarah had, and why would she think it was Sophie? Finally, I sat on the couch and dialed her number. It rang twice before I heard her voice frantic. Tired. The background filled with the unmistakable wails of a crying baby. "Hello," she answered, breathless. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "It's Emily." There was a pause, then a sigh. Part relief, part exhaustion. "Oh my God. I'm so glad you called. The baby won't stop crying. I didn't know newborns were this hard. How do you do it every day?" Something twisted in my stomach. "Sarah, what baby?" There was a long silence on the other end, like someone slowly realizing they'd made a horrible mistake. "The baby. Sophie," she said hesitantly, and I could hear the doubt begin to creep into her voice. "Your daughter. Richard brought her over 2 days ago. He said you were having a hard time and needed rest, that you asked him to drop her off." "Sarah," I said slowly. Sophie's here. With me. She never left. Another silence, longer this time. The baby on her end was still crying. Loud and desperate. What she whispered, then, "Who is this?" I felt a chill race down my spine. "I don't know," I said honestly, my heart pounding. "But Sophie has been with me every moment. I never asked anyone to take her anywhere." Sarah's voice cracked. "He told me not to call you, said you were overwhelmed and needed space. I thought I was helping. I mean, I've never taken care of a baby before, but I didn't want to let you down." I pressed my fingers into my forehead, trying to fight off the surge of panic. "Sarah, listen to me carefully. Describe the baby." She stammered for a moment. "She's small newborn, definitely. Dark hair, pale skin, brown eyes." I didn't think to question it. I mean, I hadn't seen Sophie since the hospital. I swallowed hard. Sophie had her father's blue-gray eyes. She hadn't even opened them fully until a few days after we came home. "That's not Sophie," I said, almost in a whisper. "That's not my daughter." "Oh, God," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "Oh, God. What's happening?" I had no answers. Only a blinding rush of adrenaline and the sour taste of betrayal blooming in my chest. Why would Richard do this, I asked, more to myself than to her. Sarah hesitated. "I don't know. He said something about helping, that you were struggling. But now I don't know what to believe." A silence fell between us, heavy and suffocating. Then Sarah added, barely above a whisper, "Emily, what do I do with the baby?" I blinked back tears. "Keep her safe. I'll figure it out." We hung up, and I sat there for a long while, the world outside growing darker as twilight bled through the windows. Sophie stirred in her sleep beside me, completely unaware that her name, her identity, was being used in some kind of twisted game. That night, as I rocked Sophie gently to sleep, I couldn't stop thinking about what Sarah had said, that Richard told her not to call me. Why would he keep it a secret? Why use my name, my child? Was it truly concern? Or was there something deeper, something darker? I'd always trusted Richard. He was the charming grandfather type, full of jokes and stories, always bringing over homemade stew and too many gifts. He'd cried at our wedding, cried again when Sophie was born. I never once imagined he would lie to me about my own daughter. But now, doubt had crept in, and it refused to leave. I tucked Sophie in, kissed her forehead, and turned off the light. But I didn't sleep that night, because somewhere across town, another baby was crying, and I had no idea who she was. The wind was sharp that evening, carrying the scent of dying leaves and something heavier, something unspoken. As James and I pulled up in front of his parents' house, I noticed how the maple trees, once vibrant with autumn color, now looked skeletal under the pale porch light. I clutched Sophie tighter against my chest, her warm body the only source of comfort in the cold air. James stood still for a moment before reaching out to ring the doorbell. His hand hesitated. I could see it, he was nervous too. The door opened slowly, revealing Helen, his mother. She looked older than I remembered. The pain from her chronic back issues showed in the way she leaned against the doorframe. Her face lit up the second she saw James, but the smile faltered when her eyes settled on me and the baby in my arms. "Is this?" she asked softly, stepping aside to let us in. "This is Sophie," I said, my voice quiet but steady. "Your granddaughter." Helen's lips trembled. James never brought me photos. I didn't want to be a burden, not with my back. "But she's beautiful." James guided her to the couch, helping her sit down slowly. I moved to stand near the window, watching the wind rattle the branches outside, trying to make sense of the mess we were walking into. Helen held Sophie in her arms for the first time, and something softened in her face. But as she looked up at me, I saw a flicker of confusion. "Wait," she said, brows furrowed. Then, "Who is the baby Sarah's been caring for?" My heart clenched. "That's what we're here to figure out." Just then, the front door opened again. Sarah walked in, her eyes ringed with exhaustion. A bundled infant clutched to her chest. Her sweater was stained, her hair pulled back hastily, and she looked like she hadn't slept in days. When she saw me standing there with Sophie, she froze. The baby in her arms let out a soft whimper. Sarah blinked rapidly and then looked down at the child she had been mothering for nearly a week. I thought she was yours," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Richard said. He said you needed rest. He said you asked him to bring her." James stood beside me now, his hand finding mine. I could feel the tremble in his fingers. "She's not ours," I said gently, though my stomach was twisting. "That's not Sophie." Sarah collapsed into the armchair, clutching the baby as if to protect her. "I didn't know," she said, eyes wet. "I was trying to help. I thought I was doing the right thing." Helen's face had gone pale. "Richard said all of this." Without telling any of us, James's jaw clenched. "Where is he?" "He's on his way." Sarah said, looking down at the baby again. He said he had some work to finish before coming home. Of course, James muttered. Always has a reason. Always a delay. The room grew heavy, thick with unease. Sophie stirred slightly in my arms, and I gently rocked her back and forth. I didn't blame Sarah. She was a pawn in something much bigger, and I could see the shame in her eyes. Her exhaustion wasn't just physical, it was emotional. She had been lied to, used, and now she sat there holding a child she thought was part of her family. Helen's voice broke the silence. I knew something was wrong. I knew it the moment he told me not to bother you two. Said you were too tired, too distant. But I didn't push. I didn't ask. She turned to James. How could I not have seen it? No one saw it, James said bitterly. Because we trusted him. I looked around the room at Helen, stunned and regretful, at Sarah, overwhelmed and tearful, at James, trying to hold it all together, and I realized this wasn't just about a baby or a lie. It was about a family slowly unraveling. Emily, James said, his voice low but resolute. We wait. We don't say another word until he gets here. And then we find out the truth. I nodded. Because whatever came next, we weren't turning away from it, not anymore. The front door creaked open just after 8:00 p.m. I could hear the hesitant scuff of shoes against the welcome mat, the sound of someone trying not to be noticed. Richard stepped in, carrying a briefcase he clearly hadn't touched all day. His coat was draped carelessly over one arm, and his tie was slightly askew, but it wasn't his appearance that made the air shift in the room, it was his eyes. He scanned the living room quickly and froze when he saw us all gathered, James standing beside me, arms crossed, Sarah hunched protectively over the infant still in her lap, Helen seated on the edge of the couch, eyes red-rimmed but steady, and me holding Sophie like she was the only thing keeping me grounded. Evening, Richard said, his voice too casual. He offered a tight smile, like he was walking into a friendly dinner party instead of a reckoning. No one responded. He glanced at Sarah. Is something wrong with the baby? Sarah stood slowly, cradling the infant. Her lips trembled. She's not Sophie, and you know that. Richard blinked. What are you talking about? I took a step forward, pulse hammering. Enough. He turned to me, face carefully blank. Emily. No. I cut him off, voice shaking but firm. No more pretending. No more lies. Tell us the truth. Who is this child? He opened his mouth, probably to dodge or distract again, but James cut in. We know Sophie's been with Emily the entire time. You gave Sarah another baby. You used our daughter's name. You used my wife's name. Why? Richard's lips pressed into a line. The fake charm slipped. He looked at the baby again, and something in his shoulders collapsed. I thought I could manage it, he said quietly. Manage what? Sarah asked, voice rising. You told me to never call Emily. You told me she needed help. You used my concern to dump a child on me like I'm a sitter for your mess. Richard ran a hand down his face. It wasn't supposed to go on this long. Start talking, Helen said, her voice low and dangerous in a way I had never heard before. He hesitated. Then finally, he sat down in the old armchair, the one with the frayed armrests and flattened cushion, the one he always claimed as his own. Now, it looked like a throne of shame. Her name is Carla, he began. I met her 3 years ago. It was stupid. I was lonely. You and I, he glanced at Helen, but she didn't flinch. We weren't in a good place. Helen's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't speak. She got pregnant. He continued. She didn't tell me at first. Then, when the baby was born, she said she couldn't handle it. She wanted money. She wanted out. He looked down at his hands. I didn't know what to do. I thought if I brought the baby to someone I trusted, someone who wouldn't question it, someone you could manipulate, I said bitterly. He looked at me, guilt flickering behind his eyes. I didn't mean for it to hurt anyone. You didn't mean, James exploded, stepping forward. You let Sarah believe this baby was ours. You made her think Emily abandoned her own child. What kind of person does that? A desperate one, Richard muttered. That's not an excuse, Sarah said. That's not love. That's using people. I gave you money, Richard said to her. I made sure you had everything you needed. I needed honesty. Sarah cried. I would have helped if you'd just told me the truth, but you lied. To all of us. Helen stood up, and for a moment, she looked like she might fall. But she didn't. Her spine straightened as if something inside her had finally snapped back into place. I forgave you once, she said, her voice trembling. I told myself people make mistakes. I stayed. I worked through it. But this is beyond anything I can accept. Richard turned to her, panic on his face. Helen, please. No, she whispered. We built a life on trust, Richard, and you set it on fire. You brought a child into this world and lied about her parentage. You humiliated Sarah. You endangered Emily's family. And you dragged our son into this mess. I won't defend you anymore. She turned to James. Call Carla. Tell her to come get her child. If she won't, we'll contact child services, but we won't be covering for him again. I held Sophie closer as Sarah finally lowered herself into a chair, tears running silently down her cheeks. Her hands gently rocked the baby in her arms, and for a moment, it felt like we were all frozen caught in the wreckage of someone else's deceit. James reached for my hand. "We'll fix this," he said, more to himself than anyone else. But I wasn't so sure. Some fractures don't mend cleanly. Some truths shatter more than lies ever could. Still, as I looked around the room at Sarah's broken trust, at Helen's quiet strength, at James's resolve, I realized we were no longer pretending. And maybe, just maybe, that was a start. 1 month later, everything was quieter. The leaves had turned brittle and golden in our little town outside Chicago, fluttering down the sidewalks like a slow-moving river of change. From my kitchen window, I could see Sophie lying on a blanket in the yard, babbling at the sky, her tiny fists punching the air like she was trying to catch the light. James was pruning the hedges badly, but with endearing effort, as always. Inside, the scent of vanilla and warm cinnamon drifted from the oven. I was baking again. Something I hadn't done since pregnancy left me too nauseous to even look at a muffin. Life hadn't gone back to what it was, but maybe that was the point. It had moved forward. Richard hadn't called, not once. After the truth came out, Carla had sued him for child support and publicly severed ties. According to Sarah, who heard from a friend of a friend, he was living alone in the old duplex he used to rent out to students. The stove was broken. He didn't know how to use the washer. His friends stopped visiting. I imagined him sitting in the quiet, surrounded by the echo of all the stories he'd told, only now no one believed them. I should have felt vindicated, but I didn't. I just felt done. Sarah and Helen had moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment a few blocks from us. It wasn't fancy, but it was filled with light. I helped them paint the walls soft yellow. Helen planted herbs on the windowsill, basil, mint, thyme. Sarah brought home a cat named Buttons that she pretended to hate but secretly let sleep on her chest. Every Sunday, they came over for dinner. We'd sit in the backyard if the weather allowed, or squeeze around our kitchen table. Sophie loved it. She'd squeal every time Sarah entered the room, and Helen would insist on feeding her mashed peas like it was a sacred ritual. One Sunday, I baked a small cake, just a simple vanilla sponge with cream cheese frosting and pink sprinkles. "What's the occasion?" James asked as I lit a single candle. I smiled. "Sophie's 1-month birthday." He blinked. "That was last week." "I know," I said, "but we didn't get to celebrate it then. We were too busy, surviving." Everyone went quiet for a moment. Then Helen reached for Sophie and, for the first time, asked without hesitation, "May I?" I placed my daughter in her arms. Helen stared down at Sophie like she was holding the most fragile, beautiful thing in the world. Her hands trembled a little, but she held her granddaughter close, breathing her in like a memory she didn't want to forget. "Hi, sweet girl," she whispered. "I'm your grandma." Sarah wiped a tear, trying to play it off as allergies. James wrapped an arm around my shoulder, and for the first time in a long time, I felt whole. We didn't talk about Richard much anymore, not because we were ignoring the pain, but because we'd acknowledged it and then let it go. I learned how to speak up, how to protect what mattered, not just Sophie, but Sarah, Helen, myself. James, too, changed. He started going to therapy. Something he'd once said was a waste of time. Now he came home with a notebook full of scribbled reflections and ideas about fatherhood and boundaries and forgiveness. Sarah went back to school part-time. She was studying early childhood development, saying if she was going to take care of babies, she might as well get paid properly for it. Helen joined a walking group, started wearing bold lipstick again, and talked about taking a trip to Maine in the spring. We were all building something new, brick by brick, story by story. That evening, after everyone had gone and Sophie was asleep, James and I sat on the porch swing. The breeze was cool, the stars just beginning to show. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded. "Better than okay." He looked at me. "I'm proud of you." I leaned against him. "I'm proud of us." And I meant it. The betrayal had cracked us open, but what grew from that rupture was stronger, truer, and more beautiful than I ever expected. Because when you strip away the lies, what's left is the truth. And when you nurture that truth with love, forgiveness, and courage, it blooms into something you can finally call home.